great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for an evening with best-selling author B.A. Shapiro. Best-selling author B.A. Shapiro is here to discuss her new book, Metropolis, a Novel, in this Zoom webinar. Barbara will be interviewed by Gary Braver, who is the best-selling and award-winning author of 8 critically acclaimed mysteries and medical thrillers. Let me give you a little bit about Gary first. Gary Braver is the best-selling author. Oh, I already said that. Some of his books include Gray Matter and Flashback, which was the first thriller to win the Mass Book Award. His work has been translated into several languages. 2 have been optioned for films, including Elixir. Gary teaches science fiction, horror fiction, bestsellers, and fiction writing at Northeastern University, and he lives with his family outside of Boston. And of course, B.A. is the award-winning and New York Times best-selling author of 9 novels, including Metropolis, The Collector's Apprentice, The Muralist, and one of my favorites, The Art Forger, which won the New England Book Award for Fiction, among many other honors. Her books have been selected as community reads throughout the country and have been translated into a dozen languages. She holds a PhD in sociology and has directed research projects for a residential substance abuse facility. She's worked as a systems analyst and statistician. She headed the Boston office of a software development firm, and she served as an adjunct professor teaching sociology at Tufts University, as well as creative writing at Northeastern University. She likes writing novels the best. And Barbara splits her time between Boston and Naples, Florida. All 120 plus, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Gary and BA for being here today. And Gary, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robert. And it's great to be with you and an honor to be interviewing my good friend, Barbara Shapiro. First of all, I just want to say I thoroughly enjoyed this book, Barbara. I was very impressed from one writer to another. When you told me what you were doing, I said, how are you possibly going to carry this out? But you did. Okay. As you know, the most asked question of any writer is, where do you get your ideas? Barbara was a guest in my bestsellers class a couple of years ago when we did The Art Forger, and some years before that, Stephen King was a guest. And probably for the 100,000th time, a student raised his hand and said, Mr. King, where do you get your ideas? And he looked point blank at the kid and said, Utica, New York. Next question. So if someone was to ask Barbara where you get your ideas, you would probably say Cambridge, Massachusetts, because you opened the book with a brief clip from the Boston Globe from 2018 about rescuers being called to a Cambridge self-storage warehouse where someone had fallen down an elevator shaft. Barbara, what about this little clipping from the Boston Globe appealed to your fertile imagination?
Well, actually, the clipping is a result of my imagination, but one of the I'd like to answer the first question like Stephen King did, but instead I'll tell you that the idea, part of it came from a Boston Globe article, so I felt I had to start the book. I read an article in the Boston Globe about a place that was a self-storage facility in Cambridge, right across the street from MIT. And it was built in the late 19th century, and it was this big, giant brick monstrosity that looked kind of like a medieval castle. And in the article, they had photos of inside of all the units and all of the people that were in there, and they were like all so different and amazing. And I thought, wow, what if I said a book in a self-storage facility? So I did.
And you did, absolutely. And we're going to talk about the book and the structure of the book, but since we're at the beginning of the book, every book obviously has one first line. And ideally, the first line should project or broadcast what the story is about, or maybe the tone, the voice. Dickens gave us it's the best of times, it's the worst of times, and Tale of Two Cities, and Call Me Ishmael from Moby Dick. And one of my favorites, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, It's a Pleasure to Burn. And it's brilliant because burn means you can either set on fire or be on fire, and that's the nature of burning books. Yours is It's Rose's Fault, It's Etna's fault. It's Otis Elevator's fault. All of the above and none of the above. And so what's ingenious about that, it projects a core mystery, and that appeals to whodunit curiosity readers. And so I'm just wondering if when you started out with this and you had the inspiration of this warehouse, did you start off to make a mystery at the core of the story?
All of my books have a mystery at the core, but this one has a bigger mystery at the core than my previous ones.
Right.
And so I wanted to write a book about lots of different people, and we can get into the details of this, who were very different, who didn't know each other, who never would have crossed paths had they, in normal life.
Right.
So I had the self-storage facility, but then what is it that would create BAM, something that would get them all together? So I knew it had to be a mystery. It took me a while to come up with the falling down the elevator shaft.
Right.
But that, so yeah, I kind of knew that was what I had to do.
Right. And that really binds everything together and keeps us turning the pages too. And you ingeniously pull it all together at the end. And a big, oh, wow, I never saw that coming kind of thing at the end. So this is a departure from your last three novels, which were centered on the art world. It's a significant departure. And what made you decide to do this, to go in a different route with the six people whose stories are in the warehouse?
Well, I had written 3 books that were considered historical art thrillers: The Art Forger, The Muralist, and The Collector's Apprentice. And, I thought, I don't want to get stuck in, a place and only write about the same kind of things. So I decided, okay, so in my past books, there were multiple viewpoints and there were multiple storylines, and it went back and forth in time. And I decided, okay, I'm going to write a book that has one main character. It's going to have one main storyline. It's going to be set in Boston, where I live, rather than Paris or New York and other places like Philadelphia, where I don't live. And it was going to have, it would not have any art in it. No history, no art. And then, I came up with the self-storage idea, and then I came up with all the different people idea, and then I started getting interested in street photography, and then I said, well, what's a way to put all of these together? And it was not a story that was going to have one protagonist. It was not a story that was going to have, one storyline. And so it does take place in Boston, and it does mostly take place in the present, although there is a kind of timeline that shifts a little bit.
Right.
But, but it does have art in it, and so it isn't the complete departure that I was thinking of, but it's a half a departure.
Well, you do have photography art in there, and some of your descriptions are just fabulous, and they're very vivid. I mean, you did an awful lot of study. We're going to talk about this later on with and Vivian Meyer, but I also want to mention that. Again, in conceptualizing this book, as in many well-done novels, there's a core metaphor or a core theme that holds the story together and relates the various quests of the various characters. And in Metropolis, it's your character Marta, is her thesis concept, the race for life, which focuses on the disparities at birth and how where you start out affects where you might end up. Explain the race for life concept and how you dramatize it in this novel.
Well, I had actually, so I have a PhD in sociology from Tufts University, where Marta is in the sociology
Right.
department. And when I was in graduate school, I saw this so long ago. It was actually a film. Now, of course, you can get it on YouTube. It's called The Race of Life. I'm sorry about the sirens, but
Okay.
city life. And in this, it's a dramatization of so people line up, 50 people line up to run a 600-yard dash, and whoever wins gets $100. But before the race starts, you need to respond, all of the runners need to respond to a series of questions. Some of the questions are, did you have more than 25 books in your home when you were growing up? If you did, you get to take 2 steps forward. If you didn't, you stay at the starting line. Other ones are, did you ever have to help your parents pay the rent? If the answer, you didn't have to have your parents pay the rent.
Right.
The answer is yes, you take 2 more steps forward. You you felt safe walking around your neighborhood, 2 steps forward. So after about 20 of these questions, you turn around and you look and you see that the starting line is not the same for all of us.
Right.
And this doesn't mean that somebody who's at the starting line can't win the race because they're a very fast runner, or that somebody who's got halfway there can't stumble and fall. It just means that the starting line isn't the same for us. Right. And I was fascinated by this, and I wanted to write, that was the reason I wanted to write with multiple characters, so that I could have all of these different characters who started in different places, and then have each of them going through their own plot, and then a plot that ties them together, and see if indeed at the end that where they started out made a difference in where they ended up.
And you really do have a wide gap between homeless people and the privileged, moneyed 1%, from Serge all the way up to Lydia and family. And you're mentioning uniting all these 6 characters. In any novel that doesn't have 6 protagonists, the main protagonist has 2 quests, kind of an outer public quest and an inner and a private quest. The inner quest is usually getting over some issues, and the outer quest is kind of accomplishing something that you didn't think you can do. So you've got 6 different characters, all vivid, all complex. Each has his and her own secrets. They have their emotional baggage. That would mean 12 separate quests you have to come up with, and they overlap. And so one question about how you manage it, did you write each character story separately, or did you do in alternate chapters? I mean, it's ingenious what you did. I wonder how you did it.
Well, when I actually started writing, I wrote in a linear way, because the way this story works, each character has their own little piece of it. So I couldn't write them separately because they interact too much with each other.
Right.
But before I started writing, I used statistical methods to figure out each person's individual story. So I did a normal curve for each person's story, because each story, each plot, each subplot, and each character arc follows a normal curve, according to me. And so I plotted out their different plot points in their quest, and then also in their, unconscious quest. And I did it for all the characters. I did it for the main plot. I did it for, the romantic subplot. And then I transferred these onto multicolored file cards. So like Rose she had maybe 20 plot points. So I took 20 red, because Rose red, yeah, it's all good. And put each of her plot points down on the card, put them aside. Then I did Serge's, and he has many fewer plot points. So he had blue cards, and maybe he had 8. So I did the 8 both ways, put the blue cards down. And then Marta had many plot points, and so she's hiding from ice. So I used green cards to do her, 20 plot points. And so I did this with each one, and then I ended up with a stack about this thick, and I put them out on my dining room table and moved them around and set up as 4 acts, because I write in a 4-act structure. And so I started to get their stories moving together. And then I wrote from that stack of file cards, which, didn't turn out to be the way it was, but it was close enough. And then I did another set of file cards and normal curves and scattergrams and bubblegrams and all kinds of crazy stuff, and wrote another 8 drafts to finally get it to work.
8 drafts. Oh my goodness! I mean, this is like a doctoral thesis in itself, and the way you set it out. You didn't sit down and write "It's a dark and stormy night" and go from there.
Yeah, I can't. I just feel like I'm a cowardly writer. I have so many friends who just sit down and start writing. They don't know where they're going. They just are going to write, and it's going to show them. I need to know there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right. Before I start. Otherwise, I don't know how to do it.
Right. I mean, you need a trajectory. I used to outline very extensively until I had about 20 pages, single space. And oh my gosh, Gary, I mean, that's a braver.
What is your last name?
Just start writing the book,
Yeah.
But it is, I need to know where I'm going to. I usually stop about 2/3 the way through, because I know how I'm going to end it. And then I just quit and just, get to It's a Dark and Stormy Night, chapter 1. In any case, I'm impressed with your strategy.
We're plotters.
We're plotters.
People in the audience know about plotters and pantsers.
And pantsers, by the seat of the pants, exactly. Feet first.
So we're cowardly plotters.
But we needed to have a direction to go, and you could always fill in. I know that John Grisham, I heard, writes like a 90 or 100-page outline, and then just fills in dialogue. That's almost an obsession.
That's first of all, he's John Grisham.
That's right.
He can do whatever he wants. But there's no right or wrong way to write.
No.
And nobody does it the same as anybody else. And I don't. And depending on the book that I'm writing, I do it different ways.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just the interaction.
Whatever works.
Between you and the idea and the book, and how nuts you are about writing how many drafts.
Right. Exactly. Formulaic. Okay, one of the most interesting characters, are all pretty interesting, but the one I was kind of hooked on is Serge, who is a street photographer and has amazing photos that are discovered by Zach, who himself is turned on by photography, and he also owns Metropolis. And a few times in it, you mentioned Vivian Meyer, a real-life street photographer. Tell us about Vivian Meyer and how she inspired you, because you made good use of it, and it went beyond that, I think, what Vivian Meyer would have done if you were a writer.
Well, Vivian Meyer was, so I saw a documentary about her and got absolutely fascinated. So she was this kind of, really strange woman. Some people thought she was like a witch, and other people thought she was wonderful, and some people thought that she was a loner, and other people thought that she was a wonderful person. And she worked as a nanny in the 1950s, and she had one of these Rolleiflex cameras, which is what Serge also uses. And with this camera, you can look down, actually. This is what it looks like. And so you look down through here and you take the picture here. Right. So it's very easy to take pictures of people who don't know that they're being photographed. And that was her specialty. And she felt that the way to get a true picture of a person was when they weren't aware they were being noticed.
Yes, right.
And and she she also took photos without people in them. And somehow, with both of these different kinds of photographs, she not only had, a really unique take on it, but they're like also, they get at the human condition. Like, how did she do that?
Yeah,
I,
right.
I don't know. So I decided that Serge was going to be like Vivian Meyer. And so I did a bunch of research about her, and then I actually went out, and so Metropolis takes place right where I live. And so I actually went out onto the Boston Common where Serge goes and took some photos that are, to see how it was. And, I thought I got a couple of good ones. And I showed them to my son, who's a photographer. And he goes, "Ma, don't put them on Instagram." Not good. So it's a lot harder than it looks.
Oh yeah. Well, you also probably maybe glimpsed a woman with a red cape too, right?
Yeah.
That was a lovely touch, by the
Diamond,
way.
yeah,
Um,
diamond.
Actually, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, there is art in this book. I mean, your description of what, through Zach's point of view of what he saw, and also shooting pictures of storage units, what it says about people. Why do they save what they save?
Yeah.
What particular things says about them or their family? There's something they're trying to hide from the world. I mean, so you must have gone through storage units someplace, right? And checked out the cells and the units.
Well, I actually did it online. And also, there is this TV show called Storage Wars.
Yes, right.
Which I didn't know about, but again, my son told me.
Right,
And I watched one of them. I couldn't really watch more than that, which is the model for chapter 1 of Metropolis,
Right.
where Zach, who has lost the building, is going through with an auctioneer who is getting rid of what people have left after, and they're selling it all, which is what they do on Storage Wars. And I was just so fascinated by all of the different things that people were saving and hiding and couldn't, then there were the hoarders, and that, I mean, it was just fascinating to me.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, the research, I mean, that was personal research. I mean, you have there's so many different aspects of the research in this book. I mean, the medical issues, the photography, tax laws, the dark web, something about that. What it's like to be in jail in Revere overnight. Elevator maintenance. Either you were Googling in a storm, or you had several experts or people with certain information, certain knowledge that really helped you in the criminal justice system. So first of all, you did have people you turned to, and you did Google. Your handling of the research, did you see stuff in advance, or did you, when you got to a brick wall, you called an expert, you researched something?
Yeah, all of the above. So for example, there's like a legal case in this. It's Marta and her immigration case.
Right.
So, I did, my Google research and got some books and talked to some people, and I realized I didn't know enough about what was actually going on to write about it.
Right.
So I have a friend who's an attorney. I said, "Do you happen to know anybody who does immigration law?" And he said, "Yeah, I actually know this woman, Susan Cohen." And I got in touch with her, and she was just fabulous and gave me all of this information. Everything that's in there about immigration law came from Susan. And then she read some of the stuff that I wrote to make sure that it was right. So to pay her back for her generosity, I gave her a promotion, and she is the judge in the book. It is just
Oh,
going.
right, great, great. I
And
mean,
yes, so there were people that, the photography piece also, and each of the other ones, but also there was some,
yeah,
there was some Googling, like the elevator thing. I
sure,
didn't
yeah,
know anybody was an expert in
yeah.
elevators, so I Googled it.
Thank goodness for Google. I mean,
Yeah, really.
you have
What
to
would
run to the
you do?
Saxon libraries years ago and look stuff up. And yeah, I also Boston is great for any kind of medical research. I mean, doctors like to talk shop if they've got time, and cops like to talk shop if they've got time. And I did have one problem. I tried to get a plastic surgeon, a cosmetic surgeon, to give me 20 minutes to walk me through a facelift. And since he makes $300 a minute, it would have cost me $10,000 for lunches. So I just gave up. Um, every character has a favorite. Every author has a favorite character, and you got 6 outstanding characters, well defined. Who's your favorite? Who would you like to have lunch with in your story?
Well, I have a favorite, but I'm not sure I want to have lunch with him. Because Serge, I have,
Right,
he's damaged. He's had, horrible things happen to him. He's talented, but he's a total autodidact. He never got any training, and he makes his way through life as best he can while his drive is to take all of these photographs, which
right.
of course most of them he doesn't develop, and he never shows any of them to anyone, which Vivian Meyer didn't do.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I have a soft spot for how tough it is for Serge. I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
who would I like to have lunch with? I think I'd like to have lunch with Zach. He's like this ex-drug dealer, wild guy doing all
Right,
kinds of
yeah,
crazy
right.
things, but yet has a serious side. And
Yeah.
he grows through the book to
Hmm.
be a more caring, compassionate man
Right, right.
at the beginning. And so,
I
yeah,
think with the exception of Surge, they all end up at a better place at the end.
yeah.
I mean, it may not be the race of life, but they do seem to, you know, do honorable things. And in many ways, they're
Well,
all,
some of them do, some of
yeah,
them don't.
some of them don't, yeah, but they're all a little damaged, but they all, some of them have a sense of honor and ethics, yeah, about them. I think I'd probably have lunch with Jason. It was my
Yeah, Jason is a good
a
guy.
cool guy, yeah,
Yeah, he's a cool.
and things resolve so nicely in the book. So I just thought the ending was just, I never foresaw it, and I was just applauding because he did a great job tying it all up. So what is next, Barbara? What is your next book about?
Well, because this book wasn't hard enough to write and it didn't cause me enough problems, I decided to write a book that's even more difficult to write. Um, it takes place in the present in the general Boston area. It does have multiple plot lines. It does have 6 viewpoint characters. It is centers around a mystery, in this case, a murder. The issue is that 4 of the characters are the same person. So it's about multiple personality
Ah,
disorder and murder, and it's a legal thriller,
ah,
and it's a psychological thriller. It's about art and art therapy because all
oh.
4 of these different personalities do different kinds of art. So we have the art therapist, we got the forensic psychologist, we got the lawyer.
Great. So instead of having 6 different characters, you have 4 in one body, right? Or 4 in one skull.
Yeah, right. But they're all very different.
That's great.
One is a 55-year-old woman, one is an 18-year-old boy, one is a 12-year-old girl, and the person who is the main person is a 29-year-old woman.
And of course, you probably is based on some kind of research that some of the multiple personality can be so split up into quarters in a sense,
Yeah, it's
right?
actually fascinating. And the other
Yeah,
interesting part about it is that there are a lot of people that don't believe it's a real disease.
right,
That's
right. Yeah,
another part of it.
yeah.
What's very
Oh, fascinating. It's
interesting.
great. Okay. Well, I mean, maybe we can take some questions from the floor. Robert, are folks ready?
Absolutely, Gary.
Okay.
Yep. So, and first of all, Gary, thank you so much for moderating. Greatly
Sure,
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure.
So
You know,
Teresa
so I was going to say
asks,
one thing. It's kind of hard to talk about this book without giving stuff away. I mean,
Yeah.
if this were a linear book, you know, you could take little sections of it, but the way these 6 stories come together is ingenious, and I can't recommend it more strongly. Yeah, it's a great book, Metropolis.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Gary.
Sorry, Robert, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no worries.
Yeah.
So Teresa asks, what was the most surprising or interesting thing you learned during your research for this book?
Well, there were a lot of interesting things, but probably the one of the most interesting was how hard it is on and Marta actually wasn't an illegal immigrant, but she became one, and how difficult it is to get through the system, and how the system is basically set up to make it difficult. And that so that most people cannot get the justice that they need.
Joyce asks, how long did it take you to write this book?
Um, It took about 3.5 years. Most of my books take somewhere between 3 and 4 years because I like to make it so hard on myself. And also, my first few drafts are really awful. Annie Dillard says, write the shitty first draft, and I write the shitty first draft, second draft, and third draft. So it takes a long time, and I have a very hands-on editor. So I work probably for close to a year with her after I've given her the book that I think is in good shape.
An anonymous attendee asks, even though you have things plotted out, do you find yourself sometimes surprised with where things go?
I'm not so surprised because I know when I start out at the beginning with this all plotted out that that's not going to be the way it is. I've actually written 14 novels, a bunch of which never got published, and I have never started the book where it actually starts, and I have never had the original ending be the ending. So it's part of the process. I know there are a lot of writers who say that they just start typing and the characters like run away with the story and they just follow it along and are surprised. I'm too much of a control freak for that. And also, I'm writing the book. I get to say what happens. I get to boss these people around. I don't get to boss anybody around in real life, but I get to boss my characters around. So it's me surprising myself.
So comment from Diane. Diane, who, by the way, is the director of the Tewksbury Library, who is celebrating her 12-year anniversary this week here as our director. And she's the best director I've ever worked for. She allows me to delegate some of my more mundane tasks and allows me to do fun things like this. So I appreciate her very much. She has a nice comment for BA. She says, thank you for writing books that bring such joy to my life. Your stories stay with me and the characters pop into my memory frequently.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's just what we love to hear.
So Teresa asks, and this is for both Gary and a BA, and Gary, if you ever want to answer a question, just chime in. What is the best piece of writing advice you've received that you still use in your own writing?
Well, mine is get your butt in the chair and stay there.
Yeah.
And an addendum to that is let yourself write it wrong. So those
Yeah.
are the things that I tell students and I tell myself. Yes, in the morning, get your butt in the chair.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I agree. People say, what piece of advice you get? Well, if you want to write a book, start writing, and you could write every day, either with on a keyboard or in your own head. Take notes. Um, uh, Henry James said, "Be one on whom nothing is lost." If you hear some interesting kind of expression someone uses, or you see something interesting or interaction between people, take note. You may be able to use that someday. Also, keep reading. Read the authors you would like to grow up to be. Read authors you may not like, but study their works. Don't speed read. Just and slowly go through paragraph after paragraph. How dialogue sounds like real talk, even though dialogue in books is not like real talk. How they go from one scene to the next. How they get in and out of scenes. Study other people's books and look at them the way a carpenter looks at a house.
That's a good line.
I'm going to ad lib from Teresa's question. I'm going to ask, you both were writing instructors. I think, Gary, you still are. Have you had any famous students that have maybe they've gone on to publish books? Can we name drop anyone you've taught how to write? Is that an inappropriate question?
Barbara has someone who went on to become so very big. Yeah.
Well, who's that?
The geisha.
Oh, he wasn't a student. He was teaching with me.
Oh, he was okay.
We reviewed each other's work.
Okay.
I've had a number of students. I taught mystery writing at the Cambridge Center for Adult Ed, and I did a 2-part class. And 3 of the people in the class became successful mystery writers. And, I see them at conferences and it's just really fun. And I think that's about it. What about you, Gary?
I had maybe 2 characters, two students. One, Elizabeth Burns, wrote a novel a few years back and it did very well. I don't think she had a follow-up. And one of my science fiction students, Jason Markey, became a pen pal with Ray Bradbury and ended up being the son that Ray Bradbury never had, and wrote stories inspired by Bradbury and stories set on Block Island, the title of which I don't recall, but he has had at least 3 books published. So that's Jason Markey. But there's a lot of enthusiasm in writing, but following through. One of the issues that Barbara and I had teaching at Northeastern is they get hot and they get inspired, get belly fire, and one semester, the next semester they go on and have 4 other new courses, or summer gets in the way, and so they don't continue with their projects. And that's unfortunate.
So a nice comment from Eileen. Eileen is a library trustee, my second favorite library. She also writes book reviews for our local newspaper, and she hosts a show called Book Stew, which I highly recommend, where she interviews authors, and that's a show on Wilmington Community Television. Eileen writes, "I chose your book because I recognized the Metropolitan storage warehouse on the cover from the 8 million times I've driven by it. Have you ever been inside? It's a fascinating, creepy place, and MIT still hasn't done anything with it since they bought it. I thought having some of your characters living in their units was a marvelous idea, seeing as there are as many storage units as dwelling these days, and they're cheaper. It was a fantastic choice for a setting."
Thank you. No, I never got to go inside of it because the article in the Globe that I read was of people leaving. It was after MIT had bought it, and this was like 20 years ago, I think. Maybe not that long, 10 years ago. And MIT was originally going to turn it into dorms. And I read this and I'm like, you got to be out of your mind. There are hardly any windows in the building. How could this possibly be dorms? So finally, all those brainy people at MIT realized that it couldn't be dorms because there aren't very many windows. And so now my understanding is they're going to turn it into lab space, which makes much more sense.
An anonymous attendee asks, where does your interest in art stem from?
Well, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be an artist, and my My parents were very supportive, and my father set me up with a little studio in the basement, and my mother took me to classes at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, Gary.
Oh, yes, in
Yeah,
Hartford.
at the
Yes.
local museum. And it became clear pretty early on that this wasn't where my talents lay. So I became an art appreciator, and I love museums. I love art. Wherever I go, the first thing I do is go to the art museum. And so we had moved into Boston from Lexington, and right before when I started writing the Art Forger, and I was suddenly living in the middle of all of these artists and all of these galleries and all of these museums, and decided to write the Art Forger, which is about the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist, and it's also about art forgery, and it's about Boston and a bunch of other things. And the book took off, did really well, and so I thought, well, I'll write another book about art, and that was The Muralist, which is about the oh yes, I do remember this book that I wrote. It's about the abstract expressionists, and it's a story. And then I wrote another one, The Collector's Apprentice, which is about the post-impressionists. And basically, I write what I want to learn about. And I didn't know all that much about any of these different kinds of art. So I learned it. I sat in artist studios and watched what they were doing, excuse me, and they explained to me what they were doing. And I did a whole bunch of research. So I don't have any kind of background in art or art history, but I figure after writing those 3 books and Metropolis that I have a master's degree in art history now.
There you go.
And this is a work of art.
All right. And Gary's a good interviewer, having the book nearby there to hold up. Thank you. Kathleen asks, the book delicately tackles many social and political issues in an organic and compelling way. Did you set out to comment on today's political and social issues, or was your focus on psychological issues of the individual?
I had wanted to talk about the social and political issues, particularly the race of life. The immigration piece came later because that was what was going on at that time. So I started with that as a theme. I don't usually start with theme, but this book was unusual, and I started with that as a theme. But if you want to say something, and you use a novel, you can't hit people over the head with it. That's not what you want to do. So what I tried to do was draw the reader into the characters so that they could have empathy for the characters and relate to them. And through that, learn the political, start thinking about the political and economic issues that I was concerned with. So it's an iterative process. Gary can tell you this too. There's so many aspects of writing a novel. What you see at the end looks like it's a piece that was made sense and it got put together just fine, which isn't true. You have to come up with a theme. You have to come up with a place. You have to come up with the characters. You have to come up with the plots. You got to come up with the subplots. You got to come up, and then you have to write it. And it's about the writing. So people do, as we were talking about before, people do things in different orders, and I do things in different orders in each of my books. But you have to address them all at some point. Otherwise, the novel's not going to be very good.
I'm going to open up the chat. We had a few questions in the chat, and then I'll jump back to the Q&A. But Beverly asks, can you go into more detail about your writing process? For example, your cards.
Well,
get the cards up, Barbara.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I do have some of them somewhere. It's crazy. I don't know, and I think Gary will attest to this. I do not know any other writer who does this as obsessively as I do. Some of it comes from screenwriting, where they do more of this. But so my background is statistics. That's part of my sociology training was statistics. So basically, I use a lot of these statistical and mathematical ideas to write. So as I was saying about the normal curve, so every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so I try to figure that out for each character and for each plot. I also use bubblegrams which were particularly helpful in this book, to establish the relationships between each of the characters. And in this book, at the beginning, there were very few relationships between all of the characters. And by the end, there were many more that went in different directions. And it helped me understand, for example, in this book, Rose, who is the manager of Metropolis, that she's the center. So at the beginning, she's the one who knows everybody. And all of the other things that happen kind of go through her, even though she's not the protagonist. I mean, there are 6 protagonists, as far as I'm concerned, in this book. And so I take all of that material and try to make it into a story. And the multicolored file cards really help me a lot. Because if you've got all of these multiple characters, like Gary was saying, how, it just wouldn't work without a lot of planning and plotting. And then I also do tension charts as I'm in the process of writing the book, where I give every scene a tension coefficient. And so, for example, I actually have one right here for the book I'm working on now. There is my. This also will show you what happens in revisions to the chart. And so I give a tension coefficient to every scene as I'm writing it. And you can't have a scene with no tension in it because no one's going to read it. So, but you can have scenes that are slower, like you're starting to set something up, or you're doing a little backstory, or there's been a really big scene and you got to give the reader a break. And so those get a tension coefficient of 0.25. Also, with my multicolored file cards, what I try to do is get as many pieces happening in a single scene. So the scenes that have more things going on get a 0.50 as the stories start to merge. Then when they start to merge in bigger ways, those scenes get 0.75. And then there are the really big scenes, they get the big 1.0, which are the end of each of the 4 acts going back to my normal curves. I also chart these coefficients and on graph paper to see how they work. And if I have too many that are all on the top, meaning too much tension, I know I've got to go down and balance it off. If I have too many that are low, the reader's going to stop reading the book. I got to jack it back up again. So it's a crazy nutso thing, but it's my thing.
Well, it certainly works for you, that's for sure.
Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe 3 more audience questions. I have plenty. Christine asks for BA and Gary, who are your current favorite authors that you are reading this summer?
Go ahead, Gary.
Hannah French. I finished a book called The Searcher recently. And she is a terrific writer. In spite of her last name, she's from Ireland. She's an Irish writer. She's excellent. Also from England, John Banville, a book called Snow, set in the 1950s. It's an ingenious whodunit. So those are the 2 people I'm reading.
Is that a new book or is that an older book?
Summer now. Pardon me?
Is that an older book or a newer book?
It's an older book. It's about 5 years old. I just recently discovered it. Yeah. Or Kathy discovered it and said, you got to read this. Barbara?
Well, one of my favorite authors is Elizabeth Strout. And I read all of her books, and then I was looking at something, and I thought I had read all of her books, but I hadn't read her very first book. So I just started reading that. I can never remember what books I'm reading. I actually have a list, but it's in a file that I'd have to stand up and get. What have I loved? So Hamnet, I thought that was just an amazing, amazing book. I just ran a group on it for one of my book groups. There's so many great books, and not enough time to read them all.
Right.
Of course,
Right.
a really good book that I read recently was Choose Me by,
Oh.
by Gary Braver and Tess Gerritsen. And I actually was the moderator, and this
That's right.
About a year ago.
was it really a year
It
ago?
was last June.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I moderated a discussion of
Yeah.
your book.
Right.
So Gary, BA enjoyed Choose Me, and Erica wants to know which of BA's novels is Gary's favorite?
Oh, The Art Forger. I mean, I didn't just read it. I had to plumb the depths of it because I taught it in my bestsellers course. So I really studied the book, and I loved it. I mean, it's a great mystery, and it brings in the Isabel Stewart Gardner heist. It's ingenious. I love it. Yeah.
Well, we had, as you might expect, you probably get this all the time, BA. We did have several comments and questions about The Art Forger. Dennis says, I think The Art Forger took more unexpected twists and turns than any other book I have ever read.
Wow.
And we do have a question. The Gardner heist is such a cultural touchstone. How was The Art Forger received? And is there anything you would do differently if you could rewrite it?
It was very well received. It was actually my breakout book. So it was a very big deal for me. And, I think we all, and I think Gary, you can talk to this point too. I mean, I don't reread my books after they're published because I would just want to start redoing things and changing things. There's always stuff that you would want to change, and it's also important, like for aspiring writers, to know that you have to reach a point where you're willing to say, okay, as obsessive and compulsive and OCD as I am about all of this, there has to be a point where you say, it's really good. Could I spend another 2 years and make it better? Maybe. Am I going to? No.
Yeah. The thing is that you never finish a book. You just meet a deadline.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Well put.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions. I'm tempted to ask one, but I think I'm going to wrap it there. So I'm going to say a couple words, then I'm going to throw it back to Gary and BA in case they have any final words. But folks, I wanted to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Corning Foundation and the Friends of the Tewksbury Library for being the primary sponsor for tonight's event. I want to thank the 14 libraries I previously mentioned, as well as Wellesley Books for being wonderful partners for tonight's program. Look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to this recording, a link to a feedback survey, a link to Wellesley Books to purchase a copy of Metropolis, and some information about some other upcoming virtual and in-person author visits here in Tewksbury. So with that, Gary or BA, do you have any last words for the audience? There's still over 100 of us here.
We do show and tell. You get the last word. I hold the picture.
Thank you, but I don't have your book.
Okay.
Show. Do you have your book there? You show. Go get the book. I just want to thank everybody for coming and for listening to us.
That's
and
the cover.
Excuse me. Yeah, I've got my cover waiting here to be framed.
Yeah, right.
I haven't done it yet. So anyway, it's great being here, and I love hanging with my friend Gary. So thank you.
Yeah. So thank
Thank
you,
you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their night. I have to go make sure Elvis has left the building. So thank you all. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.